Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our roundtable, and my name is Roy, and moderator of today's roundtable. And it's a great pleasure to have this opportunity to be a moderator here and to talk with three outstanding female investors. So before we start, I would like to say all three guests in this roundtable are kind of related to Forbes in one way or another. So we got Miss Helen Wang from AC Ventures, and she was one of Forbes China's top investors list. And we got Ms. Chen Shuo from IOVC, and she was the 2022 Forbes Under 30. And also we got Ms. Gwen Regina, and she's from Binance. And we know that Binance announced an investment in Forbes early this year. So, and as for me, I'm an editor at Forbes China. So we're all related to Forbes in one way or another. That's kind of interesting. So a commitment to advanced female leadership is not something new. That's not something new to Forbes, and we've always remained committed to spotlighting women on the front lines of progress. And this roundtable is to show the power and size of female and who can help us to build a more resilient and stronger future, and while we face an unprecedented time of challenge and uncertainty. So our topic is She Invests. So we're going to talk about what she invests, why she invests, and how she invests in this roundtable. And first, I would like to ask our guests to give a brief introductions about themselves and share what they've been doing recently. So let's start with Ms. Wang, please.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Wang, managing partner at AC Ventures. AC Ventures is a Southeast Asia-focused early-stage venture capital firm. Before AC Ventures, I spent about 20 years in the venture capital industry. I started as part of the founding team at GGV Capital, and then I moved to Chiming Ventures, where I was a partner at Chiming for the past 8 years. I just recently relocated back to Singapore and joined AC Ventures. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Ms. Wang. And Ms. Chen?
First of all, thanks so much for hosting, Roy, and it's a pleasure and honor to share the stage with Helen and Gwendolyn. So my name is Shuo. I'm a general partner at IOVC. We've been based out of Silicon Valley for the past decade, predominantly investing in pre-Series A, so everything seed and pre-seed into early stage enterprise SaaS startups. I actually started my career as an entrepreneur, had our company acquired, and post that, I was with Goldman Sachs, where I covered some of our largest technology clients, and fast forward for the past 10 years have been really on the venture side. Outside of my full-time venture role, I've also been teaching on the faculty at UC Berkeley. I helped start our entrepreneurship program under the College of Engineering and have been teaching here for the past decade plus. And it's been really fun to see my students getting younger and younger every day and see myself getting older and older every day.
You're still very young.
Excited too. Excited to learn from everyone on this panel today.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Chen. And Ms. Regina?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Roy, for having us. So my name is Gwen, and I'm investment director in BNB Chain. So BNB Chain, we are a blockchain smart contract platform with the largest Web3 community, 1 million daily active users. My role there is to really try to grow the BNB Chain community as well as crypto and Web3 in general. So when we invest across the board. We really like looking at early stage projects, early stage companies who are building core infrastructure, web dev tooling for blockchain in general. We also invest at the application layer where, it's not just financial support, but also non-monetary resource. As an ecosystem player, that's very, very important for us, where, again, we're really thinking about how can we grow Web3 together because we're so super nascent. And my background in general have been across being an entrepreneur as well as investor for the last 17 years, where I also started a company, had it acquired, was also fortunate to have started an investment fund a long time ago in collaboration with the Singapore government, done several things where I led market expansion as well, being an entrepreneur, also work with deep tech founders to build companies. So always, kind of like looking at the technology space from really several angles, being an entrepreneur, and investor. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Regina. And we know that the crypto world is going through a tough time right now. And how's that affecting your investment and future plan?
Actually, bear market, crypto winters are one of the best times to really invest. for a few things, right? One, there's less noise. So I actually have more time to, when I filter, there's less to filter, number one. Number two, when I filter is less like, wow, in 15 minutes, you're like, wow, okay, this is good or this is bad, right? And there's less to go through, faster to filter because it's just less task switching to a certain extent. And now this is a time where if you're still around, the good people, the good builders are still building. So this is one of the best times to be talking to companies.
And what are some of the prominent challenges that you have to deal with when you do investment right now?
In crypto or in general?
Well, in crypto, Web3, and yeah.
Well, valuations have gone down, so that's good. It's less frothy right now. I would say challenges is still, I wouldn't say just challenge in general. I think just in general, you always want to look for good teams and good projects. I think the key thing about the crypto industry is that a lot of things are evolving. We're seeing right now, more and more innovations coming in because we saw like the DeFi, NFT, GameFi summer, so to speak, like almost separate kind of periods of growth, but now you're seeing more confluence, which is much more interesting, right? But at the same time, it's also where all of us are co-creating the Web3 industry as we go along, because there's a lot of unknowns now. So I think one of the greatest challenges is almost like you have to future sense. You have to look at the project in front of you and like this, a lot of these are very, very technical. I'm not technical enough, for example, right? So you almost have to like, okay, let's take a step back. What's the core fundamentals here that's being created? What's the composability factor, leading to Web3, right? And so, yeah, so we bring in tech people to also kind of review it. And there's always, in general, I guess, technology investments, you always want to make sure you understand the product and the tech. And the same goes for Web3. It's just that there's still a lot more unknowns, I think, in Web3.
Yeah, but right now the security problem is kind of people that worry about, because we know there's a lot of hacks happened recently. Like in the first half years, like we lost like about a lot of money because of
money, like
the hacks.
some
Yeah.
hundreds of millions, almost 1 billion, I think, already for this year. I don't want to dominate the conversation, but security is a very, very important part. And BNB Chain, we're doing a lot to try to make sure that security education is there for everyone, but also making sure that builders are thinking about, say, the UI, UX, making it less easy for users to make mistakes, right? And just in general, so future proofing the core protocols. We're working with projects to have APIs that links to Red Alarm is this project that we have, a website that highlights suspicious projects to users. So there's a lot of security that we're trying to do. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Regina, for sharing. And Ms. Wong, and we know people are talking about Southeast Asia for years. And why did you choose to join AC Ventures this year? It's in February, right? If I remember right.
I joined AC Ventures, not East.
Yeah.
AC Ventures. I'm first of all, I'm from Singapore, so for me it was part of coming home to where I first started. And then secondly, actually, the last 5 years, I already started to cover Southeast Asia out of Shanghai at Qiming, because we saw that the internet market had matured in China, but the internet market was really picking up steam in Southeast Asia. As you probably know, like a country like Indonesia already has about 70% internet penetration. So we feel like it's a good time to be investing in this part of the world. And I think it's in the past been a bit more neglected, as most investors flock to China and to maybe India. So Southeast Asia still presents good opportunities in a less competitive environment. So that's why I decided to join AC Ventures.
You mentioned about opportunities. Did you find any new opportunities in the past 6 months?
Yes, we have done quite a few deals in the past 6 months as well. Yeah, we have quite a few from fintech to B2B marketplace, as well as some ESG investments, one in waste management. So there's quite a wide range of industries where we see exciting opportunities.
Yeah, I know fintech is one of the areas that is developing fast in Southeast Asia, right? Do we have any progress in that sector?
Yes, a lot. I personally invested in Akulaku at a pretty early stage. This company has scaled very well to become a unicorn. And they have a wide range of services from the sort of buy now, pay later or installment financing to the digital bank, which is also a listed company, as well as to insurance products. So they are becoming a full-fledged financial services platform.
And I guess there's going to be a lot of competitiveness right there, right? Right now, because people are going to go to the gold rush in Southeast Asia.
Well, on the whole, I mean, I spent most of my career in China, which I think is a lot more, has a lot more capital and a lot more competitive intensity. So I would say that in Southeast Asia, I still think that it is far less of a competitive environment than China.
Got it. Thank you, Ms. Wong. So, Ms. Chen, you have been investing in startups with focus on how people work together in the future. So why do you choose this sector?
Yeah, actually, right before I dive in, I was about to say, actually, I can see a lot of overlap of our work here, even though I'm based out of Silicon Valley, a lot of overlap between the work that we do here with Gwen as well with Helen. So if I'm looking at underlying flow of talent, I've certainly seen a lot more people take the pandemic as an opportunity to relocate elsewhere and also explore opportunities in other sectors. I was actually out in Southeast Asia myself just earlier this year because I've had a lot of former portfolio founders or previous former students that have relocated out to Southeast Asia. So certainly lots of opportunities out there now. Even when I look at the DeFi crypto space, this is where Southeast Asia has certainly been ahead of what we've done here in the US. It was only as of earlier this year that President Biden had signed an executive order supporting Web3 innovation. And California actually, as of a little over a month ago, became the first state in the US to also have a governor sign an executive order supporting Web3 innovation. I actually just taught a program for about 50 senators and state legislators here in California, basically thinking through how to translate the executive order into actual legislation around regulatory frameworks for fintech and DeFi. So lots more to talk about in that space there if there's interest later on. But as you mentioned, future of work is kind of a broader space that I invest in. I would say this has predominantly been our investment thesis out of Fund 1 and Fund 2. As we're going into Fund 3, we've actually noticed a lot of what we had considered 10 years ago as future of work have already materialized. And of course, the pandemic had helped expedite that. So I think going to Fund 3 will actually be even more specifically focused. So previously, when we talked about future of work, we're actually referring to 4 very specific areas. And everyone defines it differently. So I'm sure there will be plenty of people who thinks that there's additional things that I'm not mentioning or things that I'm breaking down. But the 4 areas we've been focused on is number 1 being digital transformation. How do we help legacy companies that have historically worked with honestly very bad software expedite so that it's actually a pleasant experience for employees? It's more efficient and time efficient and actually a good user experience. That's something that we've seen change a lot in the last 10 years. It's no longer the same as before where employees showed up and expected to use Windows XP with extremely legacy software. So fortunately, we've seen a lot more SaaS adoption. So that is becoming more of what we've done in the past and less focused on going in the future. And the remaining 3 that we've been investing in is what is done when we go to work. I'm really referring to how does automation augment the work that we do? So what are the pieces that we automate and what are the pieces that we actually do need humans to focus on? So things like SaaS, that includes components of AI to automate, but also with a human-enabled component where we say, let's use AI, for example, to identify for employee behavior and give personalized coaching recommendations for how employees can improve. This specific startup is a company called Torch. We did that investment almost 10 years ago. They're now post-Series C and have been working with some of the largest companies in the world like Twitch, Reddit, Visa, et cetera. The third area we invest in is really kind of thinking about hybridization of workplace, which is where we do our actual work. That has obviously expedited with the pandemic. So fortunately, a lot of the companies we had done, again, 10 years ago are now kind of coming into fruition. And then the last one that we've been focusing on is diversification of workforce. We're not talking about diversity in the traditional sense. Of course, it includes women and other underrepresented minorities, but it also means diversity in the sense of what are the new values that are going to be in focus in the workplace. Things like ESG, things like DEIB, and especially bringing the belonging piece. So digital transformation, automation of work, hybridization of workplace, and diversity of workforce. Those are our 4 areas.
Got it. So as you just mentioned, you also spend some time or a lot of time doing education work. Is that right?
So one day a week or one afternoon a week is when I teach.
So that's your hobby, or that's what we're going to do in the future?
When I was an entrepreneur, when I was running a startup, I had coincidentally started sharing a lot of lessons I had learned as an entrepreneur, and I was invited to join the faculty at UC Berkeley. I had originally taught under the business school and then got poached by the College of Engineering. And I kept on doing that as a way of giving back. But honestly, over time, selfishly, I've learned so much from my students, because if we're investing in the future, the best way to learn about what the future looks like is to teach and learn from the generation that's going to be running the future. So I've learned a lot from my students now. I get about 40% grad students, which are more normally aged, but I get 60% undergrads. They're all born post-2000, and they're incredibly impressive. This is the first batch of students this semester I've gotten where 90% of them plus have had some form of entrepreneurial experience already before they even came into class. That was never the case before. But now I have students who have started their own companies, interned at much larger companies. Some of them even have gotten their smaller startups acquired before. I have a student in this class where they run an online slime business that brings in $4 million in revenue every month, not every year. So I have some really, really impressive post-2000 kids in my class.
So that's a good way to learn from this Z people. I would say.
Yeah, Gen Z, strawberry generation as well. That's what we call them. No, I think
yeah.
Future founders, future CEOs, I guess.
Yeah, right. So here's the question for our 3 guests. So when it comes to investment, do you think that women can make different results from men? And if so, how does the difference happen? And let's start with Ms. Wong.
I'm not sure that women actually make different results from men. I think women are just as capable as men, but I think that in certain areas, women are maybe more in tune with, let's say, what the female consumer or the average consumer wants. And so in like a consumer internet sector and some of the pure consumer plays that we've seen, I think women investors are pretty good. I think that in general, I wouldn't say that there's a gender bias. I would just say that definitely I've seen very good and people who are very good at analyzing business models that are female, and I've seen very good ones that are male as well. So I personally think that we just shouldn't have this gender bias towards investing. Yeah.
So you're just all investors, and just there's no difference between women or men. They're just doing the same jobs, doing the same work. Good.
Well, yeah, I think on the whole, yes, but I would say that there are maybe certain characteristics which are different. So, for example, on the board, right, of a company, I think that female board members I've seen tend to be more, have more empathy. They are able to have put aside the egos, and generally a lot of female board members I've seen don't have as big an ego as some of the male counterparts, and so they are able to communicate a lot more effectively, maybe sometimes with the founders, especially in very difficult situations. So I find that to be maybe a slight characteristic, but I would say it's a generalization that I'm just putting across here.
Got it. So Ms. Chen, how do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Helen that it's really hard to kind of put stereotypes to what female founders versus male founders are like. Because I've definitely seen folks that break the stereotype, whether they are female founders or male founders. But high level, I would say a couple of things. Number one is definitely acknowledging the fact that female founders have received less funding, at least in the US. That's the area I'm familiar with. In fact, throughout the pandemic, we've seen that actually out of all the venture capital that has been written out, just in terms of proportional split, more money has actually gone to male founders throughout the pandemic and less money than before in history written to female founders. So that's definitely factually correct, which I think means that there is an opportunity to identify female founders running startups that are relatively undervalued just because female founders as a population are receiving less capital. And then the second part is that we've seen in data here in the US over a decade-long longitudinal study that basically co-founding teams that have a female co-founder on the team tend to be 67% more likely to stay alive 10 years later than if it was an all-male team. And then the last stat that we've seen on a board level, which Helen brought up, and I absolutely agree, that on American boards of public companies, if they have one additional female board member, they are significantly less likely as a company to get into situations of fraud and get in trouble and be persecuted for all of that. So I think it is proven, whether it is among co-founders or among board members, that additional diversity of thought is helpful. And of course, we want to expand that beyond female founders too, right? Whether it's, of course, this is less of an issue in Asia, but more so of an issue in the US, underrepresented minorities. Asian Americans definitely are underrepresented here in the US. And of course, we have underrepresented minorities, other categories. But if I were to just focus on the numbers I'm familiar with here in the US, Asian American VCs actually manage less than 3% of total AUM, even though we have demonstrated that, as a subsegment, Asian Americans typically generate outsized returns. So there's definitely an opportunity for improvement for underrepresentation when you slice it in different ways, for sure.
Yeah, so you brought up a point, which is female get less funds than male when it comes to doing the startup. So, Ms. Regina, do you think set up female-focused funds to support investing in female-led startups is a good way to promote women entrepreneurship?
Female-focused funds, I mean, to each our own, right? I think there are many funds, both, without bias agenda, and as well as female-focused funds and funds that focus on investing underrepresented minorities are all good in different ways. I do think that there's some positivity to almost like positive discrimination, because like Shuo here has really talked through a lot of stats. We've seen all these across the board, and it is a fact of life, right? There's some systemic bias against underrepresented minorities in general. So I think while myself, I probably would not do a focus. I think my focus is always on core technology. I mean, the word is out, right? Maybe later on, but yeah, for people focusing on women-focused funds, yeah, sure, why not? Because looking at a targeted segment does really make sure that you are more open-minded, almost, right? You're almost forcing your team and the people who are joining your fund to be more open-minded. It's almost like the key thing, right? If I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, you will think of a pink elephant, right? So not saying that investing in underrepresented minorities, females or others included, but more like, yeah, there is a certain positive to be said about female-focused fund.
So yeah, so in addition to the female-focused funds, do you think there's other better ways to promote female entrepreneurship in this ecosystem?
Yeah, many different ways. So just in general, we need education of all the stats that Shuo again mentioned, and the point that Helen mentioned as well, the empathy on boards and stuff like that, right? This is education that we need across the board to males as well. So I'm glad here, Roy, that you are male, right? And this female investor panel. It would be nice also if we had like a male investor to provide some perspective, but of course there's only three panelists, 3 slots, right? So yeah, so I do think that there is value to just be more inclusive from the get-go and just educate the non-represented, the non-minorities essentially. So in this particular case, talking about gender, we just need more people, more males, females to be more aware, because it's not just that we cannot assume that just because you're female, you know that there is a lack or know that we're underrepresented. It's sometimes you also, this is a gender-free bias to some extent. So yeah, so we do need both more females and even more males to be just more aware of all the stuff that we've talked about.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You used to work in Meta, right, as the head of VC programs. So how do you see the big tech's situation when in dealing with the gender balance?
Yeah, so in terms of gender balance in general, it is something that, again, across the board, is talked about, right? There's an knowledge and awareness that, hey, let's really make sure, which parts of societies are unrepresented, right? So when you even talk about, say, from an investing point of view, I would say that a lot of times we're also looking at founders from a certain socioeconomic background. That's a different kind of underrepresented minority, right? Do we want to search out the core and good talent that may not have had the opportunities that, others have, right? So I think that, again, the whole idea about underrepresented, and I don't want to focus on females specifically. It is really just a topic that I think has really taken big tech, but also taken the investing world in general, right? I think across the board, there is a general awareness again to find these gems, because gems really are everywhere, right? It's just whether you open your eyes to them or not.
Yeah. So Ms. Wong and Ms. Chen, and you've have a lot of experience in doing research about entrepreneurs and companies. How do you what's your assessment about the current situation of the women leadership, either in VC or in other sectors?
Yeah.
So what's your,
Yeah, I think, when I started my career in venture capital in Silicon Valley, I still remember a very, prominent VC who was male. He told me that, it's harder to succeed as a female VC. And the reason is that most of the founders were male and they prefer a male VC. So I think it's sometimes, it's chicken and egg, right? Do you have female founders, funds, female GP funds that would invest more in women, or would you have more, female founders and then making it easier for females to become GPs as well, right? So I think nonetheless, I mean, what I would say is that when I came to China, it was quite a pleasant change, because there was actually a lot more women in the workforce in China and in VC as well, even though, we are still the minority. But I think on the whole, there have been a very successful female VCs in China. And so somehow is less of a topic of discussion. But I do think that over time, what I've seen is that there's been a lot more awareness of this issue, and a lot more emphasis on trying to do the right thing, which I think is very good. I think it's good both for women and as well as for the funds that may have overlooked a certain demographic group, right? So I do believe that we're moving in the right direction. At AC Ventures, we found that we have 40% of our founders are female, and 40% of the ones in high senior management positions are also female. And this is without setting up any gender-focused fund, and even prior to me joining the firm. So I think that a lot of progress has been made, and it would be nice if one day we don't even have to talk about this topic, and we just have no gender bias at all.
Yeah. So Ms. Chen, do you think the progress is enough for now?
I think Helen's absolutely right that there is definitely a gap between what we see in Asia versus what we see in North America. Based out of California myself, I still see that our numbers are where female GPs represent single-digit percentage in terms of decision makers of all venture capital funding. So we're definitely by far in the minority here, whereas I think for Asian-based funds, our numbers look a lot better. And I think it's for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it's significantly more expensive and harder to find help in the US. And so many families where after they have children, women are forced to spend more time doing childcare work. In fact, we had research coming out of universities just over the past couple of years where they said even for gender equal couples where they equally split housework previous to marriage, that once they had kids, on average, women were spending 30 hours more every single week on childcare related work after having kids. So as equal as they are previous to marriage. I think when kids come around, there's just a lot more that take up women's time. So I think there's more work that we need to do here in the US in terms of learning best practices from Asia for sure. The second thing I think is that when we actually think about how to further support more female founders, there are ripple effects, right? So if women GPs and female investors only represent less than 10% of all the decision makers, then it's probably going to be harder, just like Helen said, to have this chicken and egg issue of, well, how do you support more female founders if male investors just don't understand these issues as well? Particularly as it relates to women's health in the US, because of how ethnically diverse the country is, oftentimes most of our healthcare samples are based off of older white men as opposed to women of minorities. So female minorities are much more likely to suffer health incidents because we just don't even prescribe medicine at the right kind of dosage amount. So I think it's understanding those issues and certainly having LPs play a bigger part in terms of allocating more funding towards initiatives that would support female founders. In the interest of time, I'll wrap up kind of this last point really quickly. The last thing I think, as we think about supporting female founders, is making sure that we have an equitable system set up from day one instead of building a product. I think we're all familiar with the concept of technical debt. So if you keep on building on legacy systems, that technical debt just builds up further and further. But I think I have a lot of faith in younger generations from day one, not having that diversity debt from day one, because I think at least the Gen Z founders that I work with now are much more thoughtful about including a diverse team from day one. And when you have a diverse team of co-founders, they're more likely to hire a more diverse team of employees. And those kind of effects ripple throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Can I add on a little bit, Roy? Just because in the Web3 space, you have more and more people now working with just avatars and PFPs, like profile pictures. So it's getting even more anonymized, right? I mean, there's pseudo-anonymity as well. But I think the gender thing, same with everyone here. I think I hope that I would never have to speak on a women panel at some point again. Right? It will be some other topic that is more important kind of thing. I mean, this is still important, but yeah. So I think in the Web3 space, I think there's a lot more younger generation, more Gen Zs does as well, sure. And just in general, like people are much more like, what have you done online? That's really what that matters. Your online credentials.
Yeah. As I get your point, the gender is like probably people just don't mention too much about gender. Just talking about what it's been doing and what value they have been creating for this society, and to get people to live a better life. That's what people care about, I think.
And so, of course, because we're in California, I feel like I have to mention this point, which is many people now, especially on the West Coast, will say, why are we even splitting people into two genders? There are people who don't fall into either of these buckets. So given the hippies that we are here at Berkeley, I feel compelled to share that perspective too.
Yeah, so we talk about the Gen Z, and we have a lot of Gen Z investors and entrepreneurs emerging and coming up right now. So there are a lot of new generations of females are also taking the seats at the table. So in your opinion, what kind of new characteristics do you see in these young female investors and entrepreneurs? Let's start with Ms. Chen, because you're the youngest here.
So what are our characteristics that we find to be most compelling that lead to us investing? Or if I can ask you to clarify the question a little bit more.
Well, it's either investors or entrepreneurs that the young female investors or the young female entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I guess the most exciting characteristics that I see about emerging entrepreneurs now is that they break stereotypes in every way possible. So if there were historically majors that you don't see a lot of women in, I certainly see Gen Z really taking classes and majors of all different types. So historically, if we've seen underrepresentation in STEM majors, that is becoming less and less the case. In fact, we're seeing numbers here in the US that women on average do better in academic institutions than men do. So I'm seeing a lot of great female students that are now majoring in computer science and data science and in these new emerging areas that didn't even exist just a couple of years ago. In fact, when I look at the latest data that's been at least published here out of the US, Our findings are that actually 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 weren't even invented just 5 years ago. And I think that's pretty evident when we look at some of the C-suite positions now. Many people are in C-suite positions that didn't exist when they graduated from school. For example, a longtime friend of mine, he was head of data science at LinkedIn before he got poached by Coinbase. And data science was not a field that really just existed even just 10 years ago. You would be a math major, and either you go into finance and work on Wall Street, or you work in economics at another financial institution like the Central or Reserve Bank. And other than that, there weren't a lot of other options, whereas now data science is becoming increasingly important. So when I look at female founders, I certainly see them going into these new fields more so than ever before. I serve on the board of Decode, which is the largest entrepreneurship community that's co-hosted between Berkeley and Stanford. And I get the fortune of really serving on the board alongside the CTO of Microsoft US, the chief privacy officer at Google. I mean, chief privacy officer, that was not a position that existed. And I see more women entering data privacy than ever before. So when I look at female founders, I'm excited to see them come from more diverse backgrounds and breaking these stereotypes.
Good. So how do you think, Ms. Wong and Ms. Regina? Well, what's your opinion about this topic?
To be honest, I think from what I understand, the barriers to women getting to the top in, VC or being, founders is really at the later stage, right? As they try to move up the, the ladder. And I think that the challenges are probably, twofold. One is just the fact that there is a lot of people in the hierarchy who are male, who might have some bias. And two, it's actually regarding the child rearing part, which unfortunately, because women are the ones who are going to be the ones giving birth. And, if you have a few children, it really takes a lot of time and energy away from your career. And I think those part is very hard to change, right? The latter part. I think that in my role as a managing partner here, I have started to do some mentoring for these more junior, investors, junior team members who are facing these challenges, right? I mean, how do you have work-life balance? Should I focus more on having children, right? Especially if you reach an age where having children is getting more and more difficult, or like, how do I make sure that, my husband doesn't mind that maybe I have an even better job than him and I get more recognized. I mean, I know Asia on the whole is much better than, maybe other countries, but you still have these, maybe outdated ideas, right? That somehow, you can't be stronger than your husband, and what would the husband think? So, so I think those are some of the issues that I have been very aware and trying to help them, as I share with them how I kind of went through my own personal challenges to manage, have this work-life balance. So I think that's the probably one of the things that, the senior members can do for the younger generation. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. So, Ms. Regina, you got any idea?
Yeah. Both Helen and Shaw brought up really, really good points. A lot to add there, but I think the one thing I really want to focus on is that in the Web3 space, when we look at founders right now, we're seeing different, if you talk about gender, kind of different, there's a different focus. For example, in NFT collections, NFT related startups, so non-fungible tokens, you see more females. It's just so happens, right? So it could be just interest, could be, more interest in art and stuff like that. I don't know. But yeah, we see more female founders in those spaces. So that's interesting in terms of a difference in the kinds of projects that the younger generation is kind of taking on.
Yeah, because right now we really need, we're still in progress, but we really need like more and more female like role models coming out and to give people a shout out like, okay, hey, you can do this and you have the ability, you have the potential to do this thing, and not just like limit yourself and to try the things that you want. So last question. Yeah.
Roy, sorry, that last point you made, I think is so important. I genuinely think we should better feature role models like Helen and Gwen here, because it's really hard to be what you can't see. So if you never even knew that this was a possibility, how can you ever even aspire to be that? I had no idea what venture capital was for most of my educational career. I think it was really after I had accidentally stumbled into entrepreneurship that I even knew that being an investor was a career path. So I think getting exposure as early as possible to all these career options and seeing other amazing women is such an important point.
Yeah, I think that's one of your questions to young entrepreneurs. So what's your other advice for like young entrepreneurs or young investors when they start their careers?
Please, I'll let Helen and Gwen.
Okay, let's start with Ms. Wong.
Well, I think just, not to let any gender bias, prevent you from achieving your dream, right? Just to, I know that you might encounter it, but, it's definitely not something that should hold you back. And do, like, Sherry Sandberg shared, right? Do try to lean in, right? Do try to see if there are other people that can help you. It's not just like you don't feel that everything is just falling on your own shoulders, right? Whether it's childcare or whether it's other aspects, right? Finding people to help you along the way, to mentor you, people who have gone through the same challenges as you, I think would be very helpful.
So, Ms. Regina, what's your advice?
Yeah, I would say that if you face bias, it reflects more on them than you, right? So don't let that affect your own self-confidence and stuff like that. But second, I think practically as well, because there is, I wouldn't say just general like lack of awareness, right? So in a sense, ignorance. So sometimes the people making that bias is just not aware, right? So doing some education on your part, also helps the other person, and the other person actually will be grateful. Like, hey, thank you for pointing out. I didn't realize I was biased against XYZ, right? Mm-hmm. I think third is when you think about your career and doing things, is that I think on a practical level, because it's all this systemic, say for example, sexism and again racism and what have you, right? I for the female side of things, I have found it helpful to have a group of fellow female founders and investors, right? And thinking about the same problems on a daily basis, because I do think we cannot deny that there are gender differences, right? Male, female, non-binary, and what have you, right? And just very broadly speaking, there are different ways to connect as friends, as quote unquote networking, and stuff like that. And I've just really found that the group of fellow female, again, like tech executives, very helpful, because we talk practical stuff, right? So we talk about child rearing, it's like actual practical stuff. Who can you recommend your help, right? And also then we also make sure to involve our male partners, for example, in the conversation, right? And so I think that it's just not just your own mindset, but also practically, if you find the different ways, seek mentorship, right, for all these practical stuff, and that will help the day-to-day life as well.
Got it. And Ms. Chen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Helen and Gwen more. Oftentimes it's hearing how other people have gone through their firsthand challenges that make it a lot more manageable for you. So I would certainly agree with that relationship building piece. In fact, I was talking to one of the C-suite at Google who said, one of the top things that people don't even talk about that are challenges for women is also even conceiving a child. And most people don't even realize how difficult that process is. Because this particular individual I've spoken to, he had tried 7 years with his wife, who also works at Google, to even conceive a child. So being able to have these open conversations about things that are taking your attention away from work is so important. I'm also the primary caretaker, or have also been the primary caretaker for my grandparents for the past couple of years. And that's another source of responsibility that oftentimes fall on women rather than on men, taking care of elderly, right? So whether we're talking about taking care of younger generations or older generations, and these time sucks away from work and making sure that it feels manageable, it's so important to have people who are mentors who can be helpful in that process. But the practical takeaway here I would mention is, if relationship building or even the concept of networking feels like too much, I think just break it down into a super manageable piece that you feel like you can repeat on either a weekly or monthly basis. For example, if it means reaching out and catching up with someone once a month, if that feels manageable, then stick to that and make sure you do it once a month. If that feels like too much, make it once a quarter. Every quarter, reach out to someone and make sure you maintain that relationship. So if you just set one area of focus that you feel like is important and helpful to you and stick to that habit and repeat it on a regular basis, that adds up to tremendous benefits in the long run. And I couldn't recommend that more.
Okay, well, thank you for dear guests thank you for your advice. I think that's a very good wrap for a roundtable. And I hope our audience can get some inspirations from our guests. And again, I want to thank Ms. Wong, Ms. Regina, and Ms. Chen for sharing their time, information, and wisdom. And I hope to see you next time. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for hosting. And please feel free to reach out to me if I can ever be directly helpful for anyone who's listening, watching. So feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.